This is Josh White with JW Math Tutoring, and today's video is going to go through the No Calculator section of the April 2022 SAT QAS from basically the school day test that was administered in April, like I said, of this year, 2022. One thing to keep in mind, and I say this, basically in the introduction of all my videos, is that for these problems, I will show multiple methods to solve some of them. So just be aware that this video and my other, official test explanation and solution videos are probably going to be a bit longer than some of the other ones you'll see out there, because a lot of the other ones that are on YouTube are just individuals, going through the test, showing how to solve the problem, showing one possible solution to it, and then that's it, moving on to the next problem. Okay? Whereas what I said, just a little bit ago is this video is going to show you multiple solutions, sometimes two or even three different ways to solve a problem, including using a graphing calculator. Obviously, that does not apply to this section since this is the no calculator section, but on the calculator section video of this test, which will be coming up in a few days, a graphing calculator can be used on some of the problems. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get right to it.
But life is a dream the calculus could never predict.
Now, just before I get started on the first problem from, again, Section 3 of the April 2022 QAS, no calculator section, of course. If you like this video, once you've gone through and watched it, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Sign up for notifications as well. That way, you'll find out whenever I post a new video, whether it's related to SAT math content, ACT math content, or just any math content in general. All right, so starting with problem number 1. This is a fairly basic problem because you're just given essentially the equation of a linear function or of a line. It says here f of x equals 9/2 x plus 1, but you could just basically cross this out, and just replace it with y. So it's just asking for the slope of this line or this linear function, and this is already in y equals mx plus b form, so therefore the slope is just going to be 9/2 right here. It corresponds to m. So the correct answer on this one is just letter D, 9/2. No other work to do. Now moving down the page, the problem below it, problem number 2. So here you're given an equation, and I would say the kind of most straightforward way to solve this would, to get the answer to this, would be to go ahead and just solve it out for x. So if you distribute on the left side, multiply out the 2, you get 2x minus 8, and then that's just equal to x. Then we could subtract, x on both sides, and I'm also going to add 8. So on the right side, the x's cancel, but the 8 that I add over ends up basically just remaining there. Like I said, these cancel, these 8s are going to cancel, and then 2x minus x is just x. So we just get x equals 8. Correct answer is going to be letter D. Just to point out, another way that you could solve this problem is you could technically go through the answer choices and plug them in for x, and then see which one gives you the same number on both sides of the equation. Obviously, since some of them are fractions, and there's no calculator, that would be a little difficult. So you probably wouldn't want to do that, but you could technically use back solving on this problem as well, because basically the solution or the value of x that makes it true is going to give you the same number on both sides of the equal sign. All right, now just sliding over to the right side of the page, problem number 3, it asks us for the graph of this line, linear equation, y equals 3x plus 4. Okay, so a couple things. Notice, first of all, the y-intercept is 4. We know the slope also is positive 3, or if we write it as a fraction, 3 over 1. So as I'm just going through the answer choices, okay, A is out right away because this line has a negative slope. It is going downhill from left to right. Also, we can eliminate D as well. This has a negative slope. It's going downhill from left to right. So now we're left with basically B and C as our choices. They both have the same y-intercept, so because they both cross the y-axis at 4. So the question is then, which one has the right slope? Which one has the slope of basically up 3, right 1, or down 3, left 1? By looking at it, you should be able to see that it's going to be answer choice C, but you could also confirm that by counting it out. So if you start at 4 and you go up 3, that would put you, say, up here, around 7, and then go right 1, and so like this point right here, that basically corresponds to, 7 comma 1 if we were to plot it out. And you could do the same thing going down. You could go down 3 and left 1, and you would see you would land on the line. So the correct answer for this one is just going to be letter C. And B, if you tried to, count it out, you could see to get between specific points on the graph, well, here you go up 1, and then you go right 1, 2, 3. So the slope of this one's actually 1/3. Therefore, it's incorrect, and again, letter C is the correct answer. Moving to the next page, first up we have problem number 4. Here we have a graph relating basically number of hours for time worked and also dollars, for total charges, how much a contractor charges, whatever based on how much he works, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and they want to know what the interpretation of the slope of this graph is. Okay, so whenever you're looking at for the slope of a linear equation or a line, that always represents basically the incremental change that occurs in the y variable based on a 1 unit change in the x. So in this case, x is the number of hours, and then y is is basically total charges or dollars. So the slope of this graph would basically tell us, like, for whatever maybe a 1 unit increase in the number of hours worked, how much does the charge go up by? How much does the total charge increase by in terms of dollars? So that's just going to correspond to answer choice A. Because it's basically like the hourly rate. He charges, it tells us here he charges a one-time fee and then plus an hourly rate. So in other words, for each additional hour he works, how much does his bill, increase by? That's basically what the slope is in this instance, and therefore, the interpretation of that's just going to be answer choice A. Below that, we have problem number 5. So for this one, we have a formula, and basically you want to solve this formula for x. So there's multiple ways you could do this. I mean, essentially, multiply on both sides by 2y. I mean, it's really the same as cross multiplying if you just put the z over a 1. So you get 2yz equal to x plus 3, and then you could just subtract 3. And so when it's solved for x, we get 2yz minus 3. So the correct answer for this problem is going to be letter B. Now, just to show you an alternate way that you could solve it, you could use the strategy of picking numbers here. So what I mean by that is, pick a number for x, pick a number for y, plug them in, and then see, based on those, what z turns out to equal. Then, once you have x, y, and z, you go down through the answer choices, you plug them all in, and you see which one is correct. So just to show you briefly, with one example how you would do that, I'm going to let x equal 1, and I'm going to let, let's say, y equal 2. So when I plug that in up here, I get 1 plus 3 over 2 times 2. So that gives me 4 over 4, which is 1. Therefore, z is going to equal 1. So now I could go down through all these answer choices, and basically for answer choice B, so x is 1, then I've got 2 times y, which is 2, times z, which is 1, okay, minus 3. So notice I get 1 equals 4 minus 3, I get 1 equals 1. Okay, that checks, it's correct. And if you go ahead and plug them in for the rest of them, you will find, or you should find, that they do not equal or are not correct. I'm not going to go through and bother, spending time on working them all out. Um, but I'm just kind of scanning them right now. Obviously, A is not going to match because it's going to be 4 plus 3, which is 7 on the right side. In C, if you plug that in, you're going to get 1/4 minus 3. That is not equal to 1. And D, you're going to get -2/4, which is not equal to 1. So B is the only one that works. Again, that's an alternate method you could use to solve this, but it's probably a little bit more work, a little bit more time compared to just, actually solving it out the first method, because it's really only 2 steps. Okay, now moving up, top of the next page, we have problem number 6. So here we have a parallelogram. We know the area of the parallelogram, and we also know the area of this square inside it. And it wants to know the length of AE, basically this line segment right here. So a couple things to be aware of. So the square EBDF, excuse me, EBFD, this square inside here, that area is 64. And notice that area is basically has each side is made up of multiplying obviously 2 sides by itself, but the square of the height of the parallelogram, because from E to B is equal to the height of the parallelogram. Basically, it's the perpendicular distance between, say, opposite sides. So that means if this is h, then this is also h. So 64 is just equal to h times h, or h squared. Therefore, the height of our parallelogram is 8. Now, hopefully you know the formula for area of a parallelogram. Area equals base times height. And the base, okay, which would be the entire side here, let's say AD, we don't know. The height we do know is 8. But again, we're told that the area of the parallelogram is 112. So if we just set that equal to 112, and then just divide both sides by 8, and again, you might have to do it by hand if you don't, if you don't have it memorized. The base comes out to be 14 units long, so AD is 14. Now, this side down here will also be the same as h, or the height, which is 8. So to get AE, we basically just have to subtract 14 minus 8, and that will give us 6. So the correct answer is going to be letter A, 6. Now, moving on to the next page, problem number 7. Here we have a graph where we got time or days, on our horizontal axis or x-axis, and we've got the amount of something on our vertical or y-axis. Okay, and the question it's asking about is, how many Earth masses of this nickel 56 were there when the star exploded? So because this graph, and it tells us this in the problem, shows the amount of nickel 56, remaining t days after the massive star explodes, that means the explosion happens at the start or the beginning, or in other words, when t equals 0. So we're looking at this point right here. So how many Earth masses are there at that point? Well, it's like not quite 25,000, so it's just going to be letter D, 24,000. That's it. Just reading a point from a graph and knowing basically where to look on the graph. That's what that problem deals with. Now, problem number 8. Here we have something that's geometry related. So it says which piece of information is sufficient to prove that a triangle is isosceles. The first thing has 2 sides being congruent. So in the first example, whatever, just sketch out a quick picture here. AB and BC are congruent. So it's like if you were given this picture, do you know that the triangle is isosceles? Okay, so the answer is yes, because an isosceles triangle is defined to be a triangle with 2 congruent sides in it. So therefore, anything with 1 is going to be correct. So we can eliminate this, and we can also eliminate this. So now we're down to A and C. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and just draw a new picture here. So now if we knew that angle A was congruent to angle C. Okay, is this sufficient to prove that the triangle is an isosceles triangle? The answer is yes, and the reason is because in a triangle, if you know that two angles are congruent, then there's a theorem which tells you that the sides opposite those angles are congruent. So therefore, just based on being given this information, we would know this side and this side are congruent. Therefore, we would know, again, that the triangle is isosceles. So again, the correct answer to this one is just going to be letter C, either piece of information is sufficient. Now, looking at problem 9 at the top of the next page, so it asks for which expression is equivalent to this one that is given up here. Basically, what you have to do here is you have to take the denominator and go ahead and factor it as a difference of squares. And it's actually going to factor multiple times. So the initial factorization is just going to be 4 plus 9x squared times 4 minus 9x squared. And now after that, this second parentheses will be able to be factored further. It's going to factor into basically 2 plus 3x and 2 minus 3x. So once you've factored the denominator completely, okay, what you end up with is a 4 plus 9x squared, a 2 plus 3x, and a 2 minus 3x. Then we can cancel out the 2 plus 3x on top with the 2 plus 3x on bottom, because they are entire expressions that match up. On top, everything cancels out, so you're just left with a 1. On the bottom, you have the 2 minus 3x, and you have the 4 plus 9x squared. So the correct answer to this is going to be letter C here. And now one other thing just to be aware of. Another method you could use to solve this problem is you could technically go ahead and pick numbers. Or pick a number for x, and you could plug it into the original expression, and then you could also plug it in to all of the answer choices and see which ones match. So one possible way to do that would be to plug in x equals 1. I would not choose x equals 0, because if you choose x equals 0, the original one I can just look at right away. It's going to be 2 over 16 or 1 over 8, and you will get multiple correct answers that match with that. But if you chose x equals 1, so the original one would be 5 over 16 minus 81, which is going to be, let's see, 81, in other words, 81 minus 16 will just make our answer negative, so it's going to be 65, but technically negative 65, and that would just simplify to negative 1 over 13. And now if you go ahead and plug in 1 here, so just to check with, again, I'm only going to check with answer choice C, I'm not going to check with the others, but notice in the first part, the x squared, you plug in 1, that's just 1. 4 plus 9 is 13. In the second parenthesis, you have 3 times 1 is 3. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. And on top, you have the 1. So this one turns out to be negative 1 over 13, so it checks. And if you look at all the others, you can just confirm on your own they would not check. Again, might not be the easiest or quickest way to do it, but for this one, you can also do picking numbers where you pick a number for x, plug it into the original expression, get the value, compare that to all the answer choices. Now, next up we have problem number 10. This is a quadratic equation. And so this one, basically you just either have to solve it by completing the square or quadratic formula, whichever method you prefer. I would probably recommend quadratic formula because completing the square is going to be somewhat difficult due to the fact that there's a 3 in front, so when you divide by that 3 out, you would get fractions for your b term, and then it just, it becomes more complicated than you need to do. Now, a couple things to be aware of. Okay, so ways you can save time on the SAT is using the idea of process of elimination. And here's what I mean by that. First of all, notice b is equal to negative 7. Okay, hopefully you have the quadratic formula memorized. Negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, those are the answer values you get for x. Now, So b is negative 7. If I take negative 7 and I plug that into the formula, notice the negative in front and the negative on the value will make it positive. Therefore, my answer is going to be 7 plus or minus, blah, 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 blah. So C and D are wrong right away. Okay, I can cross them both out, eliminate them. They don't have the right number in front. Now, as I'm looking between A and B, all I really need to do is calculate the value that's under the discriminant. I don't need to worry about doing 2 times A on the bottom. I just need to worry about doing B squared minus 4AC. So in other words, I just have to do the negative 7 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 1. Negative 7 squared is going to be positive 49. And then here, notice there are technically two negative signs. So when we multiply this whole thing out, it's going to be negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 1, positive 12. So we can add those two up, and it just turns out to be 61. Therefore, we know the correct answer is going to be letter B. Okay, and we don't, and again, the way you can save time is you don't have to go through all of the, actual work here when you are working out the problem. Top of the next page, we have problem number 11. Here we have another quadratic function, and it's graphed, and they want to know what equation, represents this model that's graphed out here. So again, couple things to notice. First of all, since it opens down, that means the value for A will be less than 0. And notice pretty much all of these equations are in what I call vertex form, which is y equals a parentheses x minus h squared plus k, where h and k are the vertex, a is the number in front of the parentheses. So since a has to be less than 0, i.e. a is going to be negative, we can get rid of answer choice A. We can also get rid of answer choice D. So now we're down to B and C. Notice also when we look at the graph that the vertex of it, which is right here, looks like it's at 30, 50. But the point is that it is not at, none of the coordinate values are 0. So the correct answer is going to be letter C. Notice how in this one also, they actually technically have it written as like k plus a parentheses x minus h squared. But in answer choice B, this one technically has a vertex of 0, comma 50. Okay, because it has just x squared and there's no parentheses, that's the same as if you had like negative 1/18 x minus 0 squared. Okay, so for it to be answer choice B, it technically would have to have the vertex right here at 0, comma 50. So C is the correct answer. We can get that, easily from the graph, and that's, pretty much all there is to that problem. Next problem is number 12. So looking at this one, this is just an easy, equation to go ahead and try to solve. On the left side, we just copy down the terms. The right side, we just go ahead and distribute. Now, after we do that, notice that we get 3x minus 8 on the left and 3x minus 8 on the right. So what you have to know here is basically the answer is going to be all real numbers, or in this case, it's technically D, infinite solutions. Because essentially what happens is if you try to solve this, say you try to subtract 3x, you would get negative 8 equals negative 8. That equation is true regardless of what value of x you plug in. So therefore, the answer is going to be infinitely many for the number of solutions, because any value of x will work. And one other thing, just as a review real quick, if you had two different numbers on either side of the equals, if it was 3x minus 8 equals 3x plus 8, or 3x minus 5, or whatever, some other number on the right side, that would be the no solution case. Then the answer would technically be letter A, 0. So those are good things to know, just when you have a basic equation in one variable, how to identify no solution versus infinite solutions. Okay, now, same page, top right. problem number 13. Here we have a thing that just deals with basic rules of exponents. So it's just asking for essentially the simplified version of this, but written in radical form as compared to rational exponent form. So first thing I would do is taking the k to the 3 halves and raising it to the 5/8 power means we just multiply the exponents. So 3 times 5 is 15 on top, and 2 times 8 is 16 in the denominator. So we get k to the 15/16. Now that's multiplied by k to the 5/16. Hopefully you remember when you add two variables with the same base, you go ahead and, when you multiply two variables with the same base, you add the exponents. So now we're going to do 15/16 plus 5/16. We get 20 over 16 as our exponent. That will reduce or simplify to 5 over 4 because they each have a common factor of 4. Now we can put it in radical form. The number on the bottom of the fraction, or the denominator, turns into our index. The number on the top is the power on the variable or number that's going under the radical. So the correct answer to this one is just going to be letter B. It's the fourth root of k to the fifth. Next page, we have problem number 14. And here you have two different people which are basically on different sales earning plans in terms of like salary, plus a certain percentage of commission. So the first person is basically $1,000 plus 0.1 and whatever. I'm just going to use N. I'm not going to use X just because one is plan X and one's plan Y. So the first one gets $1,000 plus 10% on the sales. 10% converted to a decimal is just 0.1. Second person gets 500 plus 20% commission, so 0.2N. And it says, and now we want to know which inequality models the sales for which plan X is more than plan Y. So I'll just set up a basic inequality here. So plan X is 1,000 plus 0.1N. We want that to be greater than the sales from plan Y, which is the 500 plus 0.2N. If you go ahead and solve that out, let's see, I'm going to get 500 because I'm going to subtract 500 on both sides. And then subtract 0.1N, subtract 0.1N. So 500 is greater than 0.1N. Now, if you're really not that comfortable with like dividing by 0.1 or dividing by decimals, all I'm going to do now is I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. So that's just going to turn this into 5,000, and then the 0.1 will just turn into 1. And now it's already solved. So again, to get from here to here, I just multiplied by 10 on both sides. Now I'm just going to rearrange it. So I'll just put my variable, whatever, I guess I could use D instead, okay, or N, on the left side. When I do that, of course, I'm going to flip the direction of my inequality. Because whenever you kind of like flip or rotate an inequality, it needs to maintain kind of like the direction the symbol is pointing. So originally, the mouth of the inequality is eating or going towards the 5,000. So when I flip the sides, it needs to still stay in that same direction. So therefore, I get that person on plan X is going to earn more when the sales are less than $5,000 per week. So the correct answer to this one is letter A. Now, an alternate method you could use for this one as well is you could pick some values between the different ranges and you could plug them in and see what they're greater in. But the problem is, because it's like split up at 1,500 and 5,000, you'd have to pick like a value maybe greater than 5,000, then one that's less than 5,000 but more than 1,500, and then maybe even one that's less than 1,500 depending on where you started. So I probably wouldn't recommend that strategy, but that is an alternate way that you could solve this problem. And if you pick easy numbers to work with, the multiplication won't be bad because you're going to multiply it by 0.1 or to find 10% of it. Multiply it by 0.2 or find 20% of it. Okay, the last multiple choice question from the no calculator section is problem number 15. And it asks for the equation of the graph here um, that's shown on the screen. So there's a couple different ways you could do this. First of all, notice these are all of the basic like y equals 2 to the x form. It's just basically they're asking what the vertical shift is. So y equals 2 to the x. If you plug in 0 for x there, 2 to the 0 is just 1. So the parent function will go through 0, 1 right here. So one way, so basically what you could do is then notice, okay, so it's basically shifted down 2 units, 1, 2, because it crosses down here at -1. So therefore, you could identify the answer as being letter D, based on that reasoning. But let's just say that you did not recognize that or whatever about in terms of the vertical shift and the parent function, blah, blah, whatever. Then what I would do is I would take a point on the graph and I would plug it in and I would see which of these four, it works out in. So what I mean is take 0, comma, -1. That's a point on the graph. Plug in 0 for x for each of them, and when you work them out, so answer choice A is 2 to the 0. First of all, 2 to the 0 is going to be 1 for each of these. So I'm not going to bother just doing that. So A is going to be 1 plus 2, which is 3. B is going to be 1 plus 1, which is 2. C is going to be 1 minus 1, which is 0. And D is going to be 1 minus 2, which is -1. Okay, so which of these matches the actual point on the graph that we have? Well, it's obviously answer choice D. So that's an alternate way that you could solve the problem as well. All right, now turning to the grid-in section, starting with problem number 16. So here you're given a graph and they just ask for the value of f of 0. So that's really no different than just asking for the y-intercept. So when x is 0, what's the y value? Well, it's right here. It is +3. So the answer to this one is just 3. That's it. No other work to be done. Just reading a value on a graph. Okay, so here we have a quadratic equation. And there's several different ways you could solve this. I'm going to do it with factoring first. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract over the 4 on both sides. So I get x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Then I'm going to factor it. So I'm going to get x and x. And it's going to be plus and minus. And I'm going to get +3 and -1. This, of course, is equal to 0. And now when I solve these out, my two answers are +1 and -3. Okay, of course we discard the -1, so the correct answer to this is just going to be +1 or 1. 1's the number you're going to grid in. Also notice the left side technically can already be factored as it is, so you could actually factor the left side into x plus 1 squared if you recognize that, and then you could square root both sides, and you could get x plus 1 equals 2 or x plus 1 equals -2, because remember when you put the square root in you have to do plus minus. And so then you would get x equals 1 or x equals -3. So same answers, same thing, -3 gets crossed out, we only keep the 1. So that's just an alternate way to solve it, basically using the square root principle. Okay, let's take a look now at problem number 18. So here, you're told about a line that passes through these 2 points that you're given. And basically, it's just asking for the y-intercept value of the line. So all I'm going to do is first just find the slope of the line by using the slope formula. So I go ahead and I will do 2 minus 0 on top for the y's, and then 6 minus 10 on the bottom for the change in x, or for the run. So I get 2 over -4, it's equal to -1/2. Now I'm going to plug that into y equals mx plus b, just to find b. So I'm going to plug that in with the 10, 0 point, although I could use the 6, 2 point, doesn't matter. So I get 0 equals my slope -1/2 times 10 plus b. 0 equals -5 plus b, course, add 5 to both sides. B will equal positive 5. So correct answer to this problem is going to be positive 5. Now for the next problem, problem number 19 at the top here, you have a system of equations. Unfortunately, because this is the no calculator section, you have to solve this out using either elimination or substitution. I'm going to use elimination. And also, since they only want the value of y, I'm going to choose to eliminate x first. So I multiplied the top by 4, I multiplied the bottom by 3. So that gives me negative 12x plus 16y equals 16. And on the bottom we get 12x minus 9y. Now on the right side, you technically get a decimal. It's just going to be 1.5. You could instead make it a fraction. You could make it 3/2 if you wanted. But now the x's are going to cancel out. We're going to add down the y column. 16y minus 9y is 7y. And then when we add down the number column, we get 17.5. So this is kind of annoying because it's a decimal, but it actually won't be that bad if we convert this to a fraction. So what you would notice is that 17, okay, is equal to 34 over 2, and 18 would be equal to 36 over 2. So 17 and a half is going to be right in the middle. It's going to be 35 over 2. So instead of 17 and a half, let me see if I can select this and delete it. Okay, so I'm going to turn this into 35 over 2 because now when I divide both sides by 7, what ends up happening is this becomes 35 over 14, and now you can just essentially divide out a common factor of 7. Okay, and it becomes 5/2. So you could grid in the answer for y as 5/2, or you could also grid it in as 2.5. Or you could also technically do 7 into 17.5 and just do it out the long way, long division, like you learned back in elementary school, and you could get 2.5 that way as well. So either answer is correct, but you do have to solve the system of equations using either elimination or substitution. Now for the last problem, number 20, this is the equation of a circle. They want to know the value of the radius. And again, you don't need to actually work out the entire thing to put the whole equation in standard form. You really only need to find what the final number on the right side is. So first, let me see if I can just delete some of these just to get some room over here. Okay. All right. So now with that being said, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up so I've got my x squared next to my x term next to a blank, and then I've got my y squared next to my y term next to a blank. Then on the right side, I'll just put it down here, I'm going to have negative 45 over 4 plus 2 blanks. So if you're not familiar with the process for completing the square, basically we take the b term, or the middle term, and we divide it by 2, and then we square it. So for the x, that would be 6 divided by 2, which is 3, and then we square it, and that's 9. And that is going to go into the blank here. It's also going to go into the blank on the right side. For y, now we take the middle term, which is 5, divide it by 2, then we square it. When we do that, I'm going to keep this as a fraction, and I'll explain why in a second. So I get 5 divided by 2, which is 5/2. I square that, I get 25 over 4. So that's going to go in the other blank on the right side. Now, we're only concerned with the right side. So these two I'm going to combine together first, and I'm going to get negative 45 plus 25, which is negative 20 over 4, and then I still have the plus 9. But notice now this just reduces to negative 5. So now I've got negative 5 plus 9, and that gives me positive 4. Standard form of a circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So 4 is equal to r squared. Therefore, r is the square root of 4, or just 2. So the radius of this circle is 2. That's what you fill in. That's what you grid in as the answer. Now, again, when you're doing this on the test, you don't need to spend time finishing the factoring of the x squared and y squared, those things to get the center of it, because they don't ask for that. But just to review that process in general, just to show you, basically what's going to happen. The way it's going to work out is on the left side, you're going to have x plus, and now the way you get the number that goes in here to factor it, or basically the h value, it's always the b over 2. Whatever you take b, you divide it by 2, before you square it, whatever number you had, that's what goes in here in the parentheses. So in this one, it's 3. And then for the y one, it's going to be the 5 halves. So it's the b, which is 5, divided by 2, makes 5 halves. That's what goes in the parentheses always. So this is what the final standard form equation of the circle would look like. Its center would be negative 3 comma negative 5 halves. And that's pretty much it. Again, we don't need this for the problem on the test. You should not spend time doing this, but just as a review in general, that's why I demonstrated it now. All right, so that was the no calculator section again for the April 22 SAT QAS, section 3 on the test. If you like this video, again, please click the like button, sign up, subscribe to my channel, and also make sure you sign up for notifications, so that way you'll find out whenever a new video is posted. Otherwise, the calculator, the full solutions and explanations to the calculator section for the same test will be posted in a couple days, so be on the lookout for that.